Who gets to make decisions for everyone else. This is great. I'm glad you all are here. This will be the third of the 4 discussions that the Office of the Bishop has suggested as we think theologically about where we are in the midst of the situation with Corona, and as we move with halting steps out of season 1 to season 2, how we maintain issues of safety, but also how we do not lose sight of the fact that we are still called to mission. And so after the last 2 stories, the one of Noah and the ark, and then last week with Isaiah and God doing something new, moved to another of the 8th century prophets, Amos, who had a lot of things to say about injustices in his time. And so I'm going to ask somebody to go ahead and read these 6 verses from Amos, and we'll have a moment of reflection, then start in some questions.
I'll do it.
Go ahead.
Irma. I'll do it, Irma. Irma is saying I'll do it. Okay. This is what the Lord God showed to me, a basket of summer fruit. He said, Amos, what do you see? And I said, a basket of summer fruit. Then the Lord said to me, the end has come upon my people Israel. I will never again pass them by. The songs of the temple shall become wailings in the day, said the Lord God. The dead bodies shall be many, cast out in every place. Be silent. Hear this, you that trample on the needy and bring to ruin the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over so that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath so that we may offer wheat for sale? We will make the ephah small and the shekel great, and practice deceit with false balances, buying the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, and selling the sweepings of the wheat. I can't see any more, Zimmer.
No, that's it. In the practice of base community Bible studies, was there a word or phrase that stood out?
Well, reading it, selling, commercialism, but it's selling this, selling that.
Trample on the needy.
The howlings of the day.
A basket of summer fruit.
The new moon.
Buying the poor.
Have another voice read it.
I can. This is what the Lord God showed me, a basket of summer fruit. He said, Amos, what do you see? And I said, a basket of summer fruit. Then the Lord said to me, the end has come upon my people Israel. I will never again pass them by. The songs of the temple shall become wailings in that day, says the Lord God. The dead bodies shall be many, cast out in every place. Be silent. Hear this, you that trample on the needy and bring to ruin the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over so that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath so that we may offer wheat for sale? We will make the ephah small and the shekel great, and practice deceit with false balances, buying the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, and selling the sweepings of the wheat.
So a slightly different question than the one that I just asked is, what image speaks to you as opposed to strikes you? What speaks to you right now? And I'll go back to the slide.
what speaks to me is I will never again pass them by.
Say more, please, Louise.
I just think we're not in this alone, and God is with us through this journey that we're on through COVID land. And sometimes we need to also be silent and listen for guidance and advice, but we won't be passed by. We're in this together.
Well, Nana and I have just finished reading The Great Influenza. And so the image that strikes me is the dead bodies shall be many. And I bet we're at 120,000 deaths in the US today.
The imagery of trampling on the needy, bringing ruin to the poor so that they can, in order to get more shekels. The triumph of business over the needs of the people.
Clearly, yeah, that whole issue of, you know, we forget about prohibitions or limitations, restrictions on commerce in the early part of this century, because, you know, we don't have those limitations. It used to be that, you know, stores were closed on Sundays, and so the similar argument, well, when can we open the store again so we can make more money? You know, that's what's going on here. Is you can't do these. You couldn't do commerce at festival time, new moon festival times, or the Sabbath. You know, that's work. You can't do that, and so they're wanting this religious festival, or even the Sabbath, even this time of rest. There's a greater concern being related here, a greater concern for making money than there is for rest, which I think is worth considering for most of us. Not necessarily just the making money, but the whole issue of productivity is so kind of ingrained in us that it's very hard for us to rest if we aren't productive. And I am way guilty of that. So, any other?
So I think this is one of the most devastating passages of any prophetical literature, and whenever it comes up in the lectionary, it makes me extremely uncomfortable. But right now, I am just hearing the truth in this, and I'm sort of, what Louise said and Deb both said resonates with me. I think it even goes beyond commercialism. It's the fact that certain populations are more adversely affected by this disease, and we're just standing by and allowing that to happen and accepting it in our own way. Whatever we do, we read the statistics and we just stand there, and it's just going on. And this is just taking on sort of a universal thing. It's the impatience of the people to have the normal life, but also this idea that this disease is just, it's striking at our society in so many different ways, and somehow we're complacent about that.
Well, certainly along those lines, Karen, we've seen how disproportionate the effect has been of this disease on the less affluent, the poorer, if you want to use that language, parts of the population. You think about the devastation on the Navajo reservation and things like that, where money just has not gotten through to them. The resources have not gotten through to them. Trampling and bringing to ruin the poor does speak highly, yeah. Any other thoughts?
This is Candace. I just want to add to that. There's so many ways to help during this illness, this period of COVID. And one of the things that we've been asking is trying to make sure that people can see their loved ones when they're in the hospital. There are people that can't go to the hospital because COVID. And so their family members can't see them, and they can't even say, goodbye in the final moments. In my family, early on in April, my niece died. She didn't die from COVID. She had a heart attack. She was 21, and my brother and her mother could not go see her. They got her to the hospital, but they closed them off and said, we're closed for COVID. Here in Denver, they put all the COVID testing at the Pepsi Center, which for the community here in the south suburbs, there was no place to go. People had to drive all the way to the Pepsi Center. So that was brought to the Tri-County Health's attention, and they are finally realizing, okay, we need to make COVID testing available. 2 churches in Denver, Rising Star and Good Hope, are offering COVID testing at their churches to serve those neighborhoods there, predominantly Black and brown people. But there are people out here who probably need to have a COVID test, but they've got to go a ways to get one. So there's so many ways we can help as a community. It's kind of like if we just look around, anything we do would be good.
Well, thanks, Candace. That gets at this sort of second question here is, how is your congregation serving those who are poor during this time? I know that at least, and I'll let other people speak too, but certainly, but we have been making the donations to Covenant Cupboard have gone up, significantly. There are more in-gatherings coming up in terms of things for the, the Interfamily Community Services, Integrated Family Community Services. Notes have gone out in that in the e-news. So there are those kinds of things. What do other people think?
I just want to respond on what Candace said, if you don't mind.
No, please.
How terrible that must have been for your brother and not to be with your niece when she died. That must have really torn him apart because I've just recently experienced my mom passing away. And it was in February, and I was so grateful to be able to get there, to be with her when she died with my siblings, and to get back. So I'm so grateful for that opportunity, and I feel so bad for those that don't have that opportunity now because of the closing of the hospitals and so on. So my thoughts and prayers are with you and your family, Candace, on that.
Thank you, Louise.
Yeah, thank you, Louise. Anyone have any, whether concrete examples or concrete ideas in terms of the answer to this question about how the congregation is serving during this time?
What comes to mind for me is hope. Do they have hope of a job? Because many of them may have lost their job. And they're getting help, but do they have any hope? Too. So those in our community that have COVID, it's a real letdown for them. of just a future in many ways.
Father Gary, how are we doing on the gift cards? I know we have some definite regulars, but you know, there isn't a place when we're in church. It doesn't mean I can't do it now, but there isn't a place where, you know, we could contribute to the gift cards, because those are important to people. It helps them get some food. As we get into the school year, the collection of notebooks and crayons and all of the rest of the things that we collect for kids, we get a call in the church for help with that. And we usually have had so much there that even if the child isn't in the specific one, we've given him or her something. So I think there's things that we're able to do. I've got egg cartons to get to Covenant Cupboard, and well, I can pick up a box of ramen noodles. I'm tight myself right now, but I can do that and get it to Covenant Cupboard. So I think that's, you know, we need to be doing that. We need to make sure we're giving to St. Clair's, and we need to make sure that we're giving to the St. Francis Center. And it's not, you know, those are important services.
Mm-hmm.
And people who are poor, having, you know, I remember this one guy, he had gotten out of jail and he was clean. And I was down at St. Francis with Karen, and he was trying to find a sleeping bag. And yet it was sort of the end of summer, but it was going to get cold outside, and we didn't have any at that time. So there's a lot of things that we can do as a congregation that are not out of what we normally do. So that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I don't know how many cards we're giving out. They don't necessarily come through me very much. We continue to do it. There are requests that come through. It's hard because we've had sort of a policy, and there are really good reasons for this, of asking people to come by and get them. And we tape them to the door, you know, in an envelope. But some people want us to mail them, and that becomes really problematic in so many ways. So I know that they have continued to go out, but I think that the issues of, I know from Joyce and from other folks that the clientele at Covenant Cupboard has gone up, the number of folks who are there, you know, and so those kinds of direct services are things that we do continue to do, as you point out. Yeah.
Well, also the
Maybe
thing,
sorry.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, maybe the question is not so much as how is your traditional organized congregation serving those, but how are you as an individual, as part of the scattered church? Yep. And I know from experience that people are stepping up help as an individual.
I was going to say also the organizations that would normally have been benefactors from our Music with a Mission concerts, and from things like the pumpkin patch that we're no longer doing. How are we looking into? I don't see appeals going out for these specific organizations in terms of support for the parish.
Well, what we'd suggested, what I suggested to Dee Dee, that she do, because of the cessation of Music with a Mission, is that she send notes to all of those people who had been angels, you know, who donated to help put on Music with a Mission, to say this is what's going on, and to send out to the mailing list who she had, that, you know, we're not going to be doing this, but that doesn't mean that the need is not there. So whatever donation that you might have made for the music, just please go ahead and make it directly to those agencies, if that's possible. Some it's more difficult because of the nature of the agency. So we recognized that was going to be a problem, and tried to address it as well as we could. But again, it's not quite the same thing. People aren't gathering and putting a $20 bill in a box.
Right.
Have to take a slightly more, be slightly more assertive in terms of how they make that gift to those agencies. But yeah, we knew that was going to be the case, and Dee Dee has passed that on to certainly the recipients. So question 3, how is your congregation working to create a more just society during this time? I'm open to all, certainly all sorts of ideas at this point. I think that this is a really critical question for us to consider, especially as we anticipate not being kind of gathered in the way that we were, 4 months ago. We won't be that way again for a number of months. And so how, as a congregation, whether jointly or individually, Karen, can we work to create that more just?
I am so glad that Candace told you about this meeting on Tuesday night, because I was very taken with a report on Longmont that when they get a call for the police department, they're sending out a team of 3. It includes an EMS, it includes a psychologist or a social worker, and it includes the police officer. And what Longmont has learned is how many issues are diffused because they have experts in areas that can cause fights to happen, arguments to happen, all these other things. And I really think that Centennial needs to do that. And in fact, I even know it, because one of the issues with Mary and the sheriff's office was they don't know what non-epileptic seizures look like. They don't know it. And so if there had been someone who had that expertise, and the fire department doesn't know it, I taught them about it. So if they had someone with expertise, I think a lot of issues could be diffused easily, save the taxpayers a lot of money, and help the person who needs the help. So I'm so glad you did that. And I realize that's me, but I'm going to do that. So I've got a suggestion.
Join in the conversation. You'll get a way to, you'll see.
Yeah, I will. I always do.
So this is Candace. Irma, I just wanted to comment on that. We here in the city looked at having a medical co-responder, psychologist or psychiatrist. And so we are now in our first program, trial period, with sending out a mental health specialist that will show up when the police have domestic disturbance calls. Because you're right, they are finding out that, one, the police aren't really equipped to handle those calls, and 2, they can better serve people if they have someone there who can de-escalate the situation and get the person what they need versus just putting handcuffs on them and taking them to jail. So we're really doing well as a country. The police departments in the cities that have realized they need to add mental health professionals.
Yes, and we need to be ready to fund that. Last year at the League of Women Voters Ballot Forum, the deputy sheriff, talking for the bond issue for the jail, answered the question that at least 85% of all the inmates in Arapahoe County Jail have severe mental illness. That is a huge problem. The ACLU was speaking against the measure because Arapahoe County does not have a locked facility, kind of like a hospital, to take people who are mentally ill and get them in and with a psychologist instead of putting them in jail.
And you're right.
And technically, they're sort of in jail because it is locked, but on the other hand, it's that thing. So I think there's grounds for a lot of improvement. And and saving some money in the long run.
So I'm going
It's
to jump in
expensive.
here, only
Yeah,
to say,
sorry.
no, only to say that I think that these issues are great. The question is, how's the congregation going to bring us back to what we're doing here? We're not going to solve the county's problem. Let's solve the congregation's problem and get us going someplace. So what is it that we can do, or that members can do to create this more just society? I think you're pointing out to some real issues that need to be addressed. So how do we address them?
Well, I like to think that the hope not despair that's going on Wednesday nights is a step in that direction. I've been immersed in reading the materials and watching the videos, I think that educating ourselves about our own not misconceptions, but our own prejudices that we're not even aware of within ourselves. That's a starting point. So I think that's the congregation's Zoom is being used. We're adding the status of the church to add seriousness to this group that's learning about racial injustice and our own culpability in that.
Thanks, Deb. Other thoughts, ideas?
It's interesting that it was pointed out that only one person in your survey knew someone with COVID.
Who'd lost a family member, not known somebody, but who'd lost someone.
Lost someone, thank you. The church is in an area not affected that much. So this question holds. I think we're doing all that. I mean, I see a lot being done already. The area is not that infiltrated at the moment.
Not by COVID in that regard, although the county certainly is, and we're in the county. But questions of injustice have maybe exacerbated by COVID, but they're here regardless of COVID.
I see.
I think one of the things that's pretty easy that our congregation could do would be to really push supporting people who have small businesses, the mom and pop restaurants, simply because they're the people who are being affected by COVID as far as the economic status is. We know that there are families here in this area who are just not making it. You know, the husband's been like, business was closed down, or the wife's business was closed down because of COVID. So I think as the businesses begin to open up, we need to do everything we can to support those folk, because they have already suffered a loss of income. And some people have actually lost their jobs and don't look to get them back. But I think that we need to get out more, and I say this even about myself, and have a push from our congregation to support businesses and people who are trying to recover from the loss. And I think that's something that we could do, just posting on our website by saying, support your local community, shop local, give local.
Thanks, Candace.
I want to come back to what Deb was saying, because as she was talking about what their project is doing, I just had these flashbacks to years and years and years of us white people and church people wanting to have the black people fix it for us. or come and tell us what to do. And I think the sort of complete opposite that is happening in projects like the one Deb is describing is dealing with our own racism, by our own personal racism. And as I've studied American history for decades and decades, and I keep reading things about the history of slavery and racism in this country that continue to surprise me. There's so much that we need to learn and take responsibility for as white people. And that's the encouraging part of what's going on in the larger church and the larger the culture now. But I think that's an answer. That would be one of my ways of responding to that question you're asking, Gary, is to continue to support those opportunities and ways in which we white people at Good Shepherd can really deal with our own racism.
We are in the process also of adding a page to our website that looks at resources for how we can look at our own personal prejudices. So making that available, hoping that people will read and watch and listen to some of these materials.
I'm thinking, Deb, not necessarily wanting to put you on the spot, but recognizing that I am.
So what's new, Gary?
Hey, that's my way. At the end of this 4 weeks that you're doing the Hope Not Despair would be to get a couple of the folks, not you, although it could include you, but not just you, but some of the other folks, especially people who aren't connected with Good Shepherd, to put together a little 2 or 3 minute video to say that what they found valuable or what created the most impact in this process for them, and what it encouraged or impelled them to do. So that, a lot of times we do these kinds of studies, these conversations, and at the end of them, that's it. And the people say that was nice and go away. But this seems to be one of those places where we have an opportunity to take some learning, especially some cross-cultural. And what I mean by that is church people and non-church people coming together and saying, we did this together. This is what came out of it. I think that would be pretty powerful.
Yes, and my co-facilitator is one of those who is very anti-religion, that church is part of the problem, not part of the solution. So I think at the end, that may be a very valuable outcome of this process. We asked everyone, and Nan was there. I don't know if she's still on the line. But part of the introduction process is, what do you hope to get out of this? And it is our intention that at the end of the first 4 weeks, we will say, what did you get out of this, and what are you going to do next?
Mm-hmm.
There is a hope that we will find at the end of the 4 weeks that we have not even come close to scratching the surface, and we'll be looking at new ways that we can be impactful in the community, effectively impactful in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that. I welcome your suggestion about doing a little video.
Doing a video. I like the idea of helping local businesses a lot.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Candace, for that.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think, we do a lot of grocery shopping at places that are not King Soopers or Safeway. Because we find, the small ethnic markets have a lot of things that we use, and they tend to be a whole lot cheaper um, than the chains. But I go in and I see that they're not busy, but they're just down the street. And we think about the small businesses and restaurants and things like that, but there are places where we can do some of our normal shopping that doesn't direct all of that to sort of more corporate interests. So.
I wonder if they'll start segregating schools again.
We already have. It's called
Have
housing
they?
units. Oh, of course we have. The housing units and people who can afford to buy houses in certain neighborhoods tend to have a certain color of skin. And as a result, with the idea of the neighborhood school is not necessarily diverse. And it really is a housing thing. And the other thing that I've seen is there's been a recurrence, particularly in larger cities, of redlining neighborhoods where the same house in a neighborhood that's predominantly Black is much less than that same house in a neighborhood that's predominantly white. All of this stuff was definitely kept undercurrent to a certain extent, but in the past 3.5 years, it has just blossomed forth. And yeah, it's redlining. And it's because of housing patterns.
Redlining has to do with financing homes.
That's right. Well, that's what the banks are doing. They're redlining because of where the home's located. It's against the law.
It is, and there's
it's
audits
hard
that
to take on the banks.
Okay, I don't think that's true, but I do agree with you about the values of the houses.
Well,
get to be coalesced with
CBS, I think, or MSNBC on Detroit.
Well, I do agree with you that certain areas of town have certain values of homes, and then it's de facto a segregation of kids because of what you can afford. I do agree with you with that. Yeah.
So,
and I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You finish your thought.
No, I'm finished.
What I was going to say is that given the time, again, sort of conflate these last two questions. The problem, of course, with English is that the word you in question 4, we can't tell if that's plural or singular. And so that's why I can easily conflate it with the last question. What is this passage saying to y'all? That can be singular or plural as Good Shepherd. At this point, we got about 5 minutes to talk about this, a little more maybe. What is Amos saying to Good Shepherd? And I'll move it back to Amos so you can be reminded. I'm going to jump in because I hadn't thought about it until I just asked that question and I jumped back at this. There's this sense in that verse 5, when will this be over so that we can go back to normal? When will this be over so that we can go back to normal? The normal that they're talking about is making more money, but I think that, for Good Shepherd, I saw it a little bit in the survey, but I also hear it when I'm talking to folks, is when will it go back to normal so that we can get back to how we generally deal with life as a church community. And so this desire to get out of the time that's preventing us from doing the normal stuff pushes away our ability to do some extraordinary stuff.
With restrictions, it's really hard to get out and do a lot because the groups aren't meeting, the various, I don't know what they're doing with things like the St. Francis Center or these others, because it's much more difficult because people just can't congregate together in places for meals and this sort of thing now. So how do we figure out how to do things to do things in a way that is compatible with our current situation and still get the same job done or meet the same needs? And I don't know that answer.
That's a good question.
I would just say again, it's not tied to the gathered church to give. You can give as an individual. You can be in the scattered church and still give. You can still make differences with generosity and also by being a Christian witness to what is going on. It's not transactional. We don't have to have the Eucharist in order to be generous and to give. So it's kind of going into that uncharted territory that's very unfamiliar to us because we're used to giving in the church environment and reacting to that environment. So it's difficult. It's difficult for me too.
But it's more than just monetary giving. It's of time, it's of effort, it's of other things that do involve getting together and being in a place with other people. And how do we reach those people that we can't reach out to physically any longer?
But I would say that what we're kind of called to is a different way of understanding how to give. That you know, I think a Good Shepherd sort of has a history, a wonderful history of giving. But when we're limited in our abilities to move freely or to gather, that does not limit our ability to get on the phone and call a legislator. That does not limit our ability to write a letter to a congressperson, or to, because I know this because I was looking at it for my son, or to participate in city council meetings because they're all online anyway. To do all of these things, we are not limited in terms of our ability to interact by pulling out our checkbook, whether it's corporately or individually. There are other ways that we can be engaged while the new moon is still on. And I think we have to start thinking about ways of engaging that are a little bit different, outside the box, if you will, that that don't involve necessarily checkbooks.
I've been kind of meditating on the New Zealand Prayer Book Confession, where they speak about things I've done and things done on my behalf, and what level of responsibility and what level of action might be available to try to examine those things done on our behalf. Because even if you look at this reading from Amos, and we're talking about, oh, those people who just want to make money, but we're the people buying what they're selling. And, you know, a number of the books I've been reading around anti-racism, et cetera, and talking about, you know, the North point, and I grew up in New Jersey, you know, pointing at the South as those people who had slavery, as if the North didn't gain anything by the work of all of those people, or the work of people in textile factories working for a dime a day, et cetera. So I guess I was babysitting during Wednesday's conversation, and it may be that these things are coming up in that conversation. But for me, religiously, it has been sort of a self-examination of what are those things that I am benefiting from, those things that I think are wrong, and where, how can I interfere with that? And whether that's at a city council level, or, you know, I just researched the backgrounds and histories, et cetera, the decision histories of various people who are coming up again for reauthorization as judges come the fall, or for people running for district attorney at the county level. So I just think that there are things that I benefit from, but I would not agree with. And so how can I take steps? How can we as a church take steps to make those things more apparent and then take some action towards them. I don't have an answer.
For quite some time, I've been involved in a group now out of the Colorado Council of Churches, but originally out of the Episcopal and Lutheran churches, called Voices for Justice. And there's an old story about a man who saw a baby floating down the river. And so he grabbed the baby and got someone to adopt it. And there was another baby and another baby and another baby all floating down the river. And the whole community was grabbing these babies and trying to take care of them. But someone else said, I think we need to go up the stream or down the stream or whatever the direction is and find out why all these babies are in the river. Let's look at the systemic causes of these things. So yeah, hope for not despair is one of those ways that we look at the systemic problem because we are the system. But also, I know from my experience testifying before the legislature that when I stand before the legislative committee and say, in the Hebrew scripture, this is what we hear. In the Christian scripture, this is what we hear. In the Quran, this is what we hear. Certainly, we are being called. That got attention from legislators in a way that someone who's just there saying, we need to cut the insurance costs or something. I mean, to go in from a faith perspective and say, this is what thousands of years of history tells us that we need to do, that has an impact. It calls people to be better people, I think, at the legislative or city level.
Thank you, Deb.
I think it's a
Well,
good point.
thank you all for yet another engaging discussion. I jotted down some ideas that hopefully you will see come out in another way in the next few weeks. But this has been really helpful, as have the prior two. Hope to see you next week. Again, we'll be talking about the Great Commandment. What does it mean to love God, love neighbor in these times, especially as we think about emerging. I wish you all a wonderful week. To any of you who are engaged in Father's Day celebrations, I hope they're good. And peace out.